Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me once again today, and this video is going to be a little bit different. This isn't quite a basic nation analysis. It isn't quite a future of the channel update because it's focused on one thing. It isn't quite a Dominions 5 game video. No, this video is simply introducing the next game that's going to be played, because the next game that's going to be played is sort of hilarious. You'll see this starting to go up probably in about 2 or 3 weeks on the channel, maybe a month depending on how much of a backlog of other stuff I have. But this will be Dominions All-Stars Warriors of the Draft, a game of drafted nations. So instead of playing the base nations in Dominions 5, which honestly is by all means complicated enough. I mean, I've only played a fraction of the nations in Dominions 5, but that's not weird enough for us. So what we've done is we got 12 players together, and we snake drafted units and commanders to create the nations that we wanted to play. So, meaning that we assembled the 12 players in random order. The guy at the top of the draft got 1 pick. We got to pick what base nation, so what nation's capital magic site and forts and all that kind of stuff they would use, plus a unit. Went all the way down the list, and then the last person on the list started again and picked a few units and mages all the way back up to the first guy on the list, etc., etc. We went back and forth, I think 4 times if I recall correctly. And so the results were these nations here. Blood Boys, Tekrate, Ishdod, Ragarus, Ilwinter, Kalkheim, Zigartharus, Prime, Sacreds of Hell, the Order of the Divine Flame, R'Lala, and the United Independent Coalition, the Revolutionaries. Because you see, I wasn't satisfied with the idea of just draft picking the best units I could to come up with something absurd and overpowered and broken like most people do. No. I decided that I wasn't going to choose any national units. For reasons that sober and awake me with plenty of sleep cannot fully explicate, I decided that I was going to play a nation of entirely independents. Independent units, independent mages, things that you can recruit from magic sites or from indie pop types, but nothing that any normal nation in the game can recruit from a fort. That was the limitation I imposed on myself, and this is the nation that I created. So here are the rules. You got 7 commanders and 7 units, 1 of each had to be capital only. It was determined that, in my case, since I was recruiting mainly independent site indies, I got to pick which of these ended up being capital only, and the same with units, pretty much. And so, as a result, I ended up with this thing, the United Independent Coalition. I wrote the fluff for it just because in a spurt of sleep deprivation fueled madness. And so what we've got is basically sort of the French/American/ Soviet socialist revolution in the Dominions lens. So let's take a look at this. Like I said, I'm not going to do a full nation analysis with the year of expansion and all of that. I have done some pretty significant testing with this nation, and I'm pretty satisfied with how it plays, to be honest. It's by no means, let me clarify, the most powerful thing I could have done. By no means, but it has some very powerful elements, and it also has some pretty hilarious elements. So, for a scout, everybody was allowed to pick a scout. For a scout, I chose the Stalker. The Stalker comes from the Hidden Kingdom of Eludia, which is it's actually a unique site. It can only spawn once in any given game, but I get to get these guys out of every fort. And here's the thing about Stalkers. They're priced exactly like regular bog standard human assassins, including being only 1 recruitment point, but their stats are much higher than bog standard human assassins. They are Assassin 3, they scale walls, and their stealth is incredibly high. And, oh, did I forget to mention, they're ethereal. They're naturally ethereal. So, as a result, Stalkers are actually some of the most efficient assassins in the game, because they only cost 60 gold. It's okay if they die. Against an average mage, you can afford to trade these guys at 2 or 3 to 1, and still be coming out ahead. On top of that, because they are ethereal, they win fights against indie commanders against basic commanders all the time. Their win rate against ye old average human commander is 90%. And so, as a result, they're just really, really effective. Combine this with the fact that I started off with the base nation of Late Age Marignon. So I got the extra Fire, Astral, and Blood Bless points. I got Citadels, which means that I get 3 command points out of my forts once I've upgraded them fully. Which means if I want to, I can be churning out 3 Ethereal Assassins per turn per fort for only 180 gold per fort, which is actually pretty amazing. So, Stalkers, very, very strong, one of the definite strengths of the nation. I picked Abysses, and I picked them mainly, despite the fact they cost 2 recruitment points for no actual magic. They're just level 2 holy. I picked them because they're disease healers and they're leaders. Level 2 priest leaders are actually important for me for reasons that I'll get into here. And disease healer is good because I have a number of old mages, and some of my most valuable mages are old. And so having disease healers would be really, really nice. Having Citadels means that those 2 recruitment points don't hurt me as much as they could. And Abysses being Holy 2 means that in the later game, I can, if I want to, plug them into a communion to make them Holy 3 or Holy 4, and use them to cast the big holy spells, which would be good. Also note, I've rewritten the fluff of every unit in this nation. I hesitate to call it a nation. This alliance as well. So, it's pretty cool. I am actually going to link the mod, overall, the mod with all these things in it, in the description of this video, so you can take a look at it if you like. But suffice it to say that the other nations here are just fucking cancer. Most of them. Some of them are not. Ishtod is pretty okay. But most of these things, R'hllala is weird. Powerful in some ways, but very weird. But most of these things are just cancer incorporated. In any case, we've got the Abysses. Priests, leaders, disease healers for 145 gold, fine. We've got Conjurers. Conjurers are actually a pop-type indie as well as a site indie. They can spawn as the defenders of certain forts, and they can spawn from the Black Tower or the Lodge. And Conjurers are nice because they are incredibly efficient Sabbath slaves and blood hunters. They cost only 65 gold, and they give you death and blood, so they're basically sorcery Imperial Geomancers, if that makes sense. Very, very nice to have. I also have the upgraded version of Conjurers, the Circle Masters. They come from the same sites. They are old. They're 165 gold for 4 paths. Fantastic value. And those paths are death and blood. Extra fantastic value. Amazing mages, and one of the few powerful independent mages that is not slow to recruit. Most independent mages that are worth a shit are slow to recruit. I took Mage, 85 gold for 3 paths, Fire, Earth, Astral. These are basically upgraded Imperial Geomancers. They can do all the stuff that Imperial Geomancers can do, plus more for very little extra money, and they give you 11 research points for 85 gold, which is really, really efficient. So they are also fantastic. The interesting thing about this nation, of course, that some of you will have already noticed very quickly, is that it is a human communion-based nation, which normally I don't like playing. Unfortunately, when it comes to independence, there are no independent giant mages, and there are very, very few independents that could even conceivably be thugs. This is one of them. The Warrior Mage. The Warrior Mage is essentially a knight in terms of chassis. Excuse me, I'm having trouble talking today. 18 protection, 15 defense skill, 12 attack and strength, 20 combat speed, so quite fast. He is a combat caster, and he has 2 paths, but his paths are unlinked elemental randoms. So most of the time, what you're going to see is a warrior mage with 2 unconnected single paths. That isn't honestly great, but there are a lot of combos that warrior mages can get that make them quite serviceable light thugs, and they're not expensive. That's the thing about them. They're 135 gold. They're half the cost of a Van Jarl. They're not, I would say, half the utility of a Van Jarl necessarily, but with relatively light gear, they can do some work, I think. If they random Fire 2, they can cast Phoenix Pyre, which you can combo with Reinvigoration gear to make them actually quite difficult to remove entirely. If they random Air 2, they can Cloud Trapeze. If they random Earth 1 and Air or Water 1, they can drop Prot buffs and summon Earth Power on themselves, and then Quicken or Mirror Image themselves as well for more offensive or more defensive power. If they random Earth and Fire, then the Fire path is just kind of a waste. If they random Fire 1 in general, the Fire path is kind of a waste in terms of thugging. But if they get 2 of any of these 3, if they get 2 of anything except Water, actually, they're in pretty decent shape. And if they get 1 Earth plus 1 something else, they're also in pretty decent shape. If they get 1 Water and 1 Air or Fire, not great. However, they also give me access to Water 2 and Air 2, which otherwise I didn't have. And Earth and Fire too, but I have access to Earth and Fire from other mages. So they give me a bit of magic diversity on a relatively cheap chassis and a relatively tough chassis, plus one that can lead armies. So they have 40 leadership, they are hard to kill, they can sit in the back casting spells, or they can buff themselves and perform as like light thugs. I don't usually like the idea of army support thugs, but these guys may function in that way. I'm not sure yet. I took them because they're cool and because I wanted something at least vaguely thuggable, just because I like thugging. And finally, for my mages, I have the Adepts of the Iron Order. These are my capital-only mages. They're very cheap for a capital-only. They are slow to recruit, as I said, most good independent mages are. They're old, they have a big Adept Researcher bonus, so they're actually efficient researchers, weirdly. Most big mages are not. Astral 2, Earth 2, and a Fire, Air, Earth, Astral random. These are actually really great mages, particularly with Magus Communions. I can link these guys into a communion of Magi, and they'll be able to cast high-level air spells, high-level earth spells, high-level astral spells, even high-level fire spells, so the Magi can already do that. The main thing Adepts of the Iron Order give me that Magi don't is that air access in my communions. So, late game, I can be able to throw down Mass Flight, Fog Warriors, Phantasmal Army, all that kinds of good stuff. Also, Adepts of the Iron Order can forge all the crystal gear I need and can forge earth boots, and etc, etc, etc. So, in that way, they're very useful as well. In terms of troops, indie troops overall I would say are worse than indie commanders. Like with indie commanders, it's pretty easy to pick out some pretty good mages. All of these, like these four right here, are actually great value. This is questionable. This is questionable. Stalkers are insane value for assassins. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 out of my 7, very, very solid. In terms of troops, it's a little bit harder, but I think I found some interesting ones. First one over here, the Burgmeister Guard. Burgmeister Guard are God's perfect chaff. They do have weaknesses. Their main weakness is area of effect evocations. But in terms of melee, Burgmeister Guard are actually hilariously effective because they have Prot 14 and they have defense skill 17. And there's 6 of them in a square because they're size 1. So even though they have low hit points, they're like skeletons on steroids. They're very, very difficult for most melee troops to kill. In order to kill Burgmeister Guard reliably, now a lot of their defense, 4 points of their defense does come from their shield, so their defense skill that actually misses an attack entirely is only 13. But even so, between the shield and the plate cuirass, you're having to cut through 30 prot before you actually hurt them. So that 5 HP doesn't look so bad at that point. Also, you can cast Legions of Steel on Burgmeister Guard. I can cast Strength of Giants on Burgmeister Guard very easily, and if I do that, their damage goes up to 15, which is not bad when it's 6 attacks per square. Burgmeister Guard are also bodyguards, level 2, and everyone in this game has assassins of some kind, pretty much. We've got a lot of Dryads. We've got, of course, my Stalkers. It's mainly Stalkers and Dryads, to be honest. There was an unfortunate reskinning accident with one of the nations that ended up giving all Dryads this horrible-looking skin. But, you know, it happens. We got Star Children in there, which are assassins. We've got... Yeah, it's Assassin Cancer, the game. It's going to be terrible, but it'll be hilarious, too. So, having something that has Bodyguard is, I think, useful. The main weakness of Burgmeister Guard is, A, they cost a lot of recruitment points, and B, their morale is actually quite bad. So, you really have to boost that morale in order to use these guys effectively. Unfortunately, there are not many good independent leaders, so I wasn't able to get one. There's one that I could have gotten, but she's slow to recruit, and it just wasn't worth it. So, Burgmeister Guard, pretty solid. Basic independent crossbows, low resource, low prot. Prot doesn't matter too much for crossbows. Fine. Nothing too special, but nothing bad. Bone Tribe Beast Hunters. I think, honestly, these guys are some of the better high-damage chaff in the game. They don't actually chaff qua chaff very well. They're not very good at standing and sucking up damage. But they have higher than average strength, attack, and defense skill, and hit points. They berserk +3, and they have a variety of survivals. They are undisciplined, which is a little bit of a problem. But the main thing about them is just they berserk, and they come with javelins and an extra high damage spear. So when they berserk, the Spetum is hitting for 21 pierce, and the javelin is hitting for 16 pierce. And they can provide a lot of firepower, as well as a lot of stabbing power. Also, since they are berserkers, you can cast a spell like any of the Berserk causing spells, like Rage or Growing Fury or what have you, automatically sends them Berserk. Which I might be able to use at some point to trigger that on demand, but probably I'm just going to rely on them going Berserk. The other thing is that even though they are undisciplined, their base morale is quite high. So especially if you have a leader who can give them a morale boost, despite being undisciplined, they're actually likely to stick around and fight for a long time, which is very, very nice. They do die. They take a lot of attrition because they have Prot 6 and don't wear helmets, but they die and they kill at pretty decent ratios. For my other troops, I actually have 2 Recruit Anywhere Independent Sacreds, and they're not high quality. I mainly took them because they're cheap and provide some kind of utility that otherwise I have a hard time getting. The first is the Saus. The Saus is or Saus, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's some kind of Greek word. This is an independent version of the Koribant, the coastal recruit sacred of Therados, which comes from an independent site that can only spawn on islands or in sea provinces, and that I have actually never seen in a game. But it exists. It's there. I believe that it spawns somewhere. It makes the Saos a recruitable unit, and so I was allowed to take them. Saos are, stat-wise, obviously, as all Sacreds are, they're somewhat overpriced for their stats. But the thing about them is they're War Dancers, which does mean they have bad formation fighters, so you only get 2 of them in a square, but it also means that they berserk when they're blessed. So they never rout as long as you get the blessing spell off. And they can carry a stat bless very, very well. So I looked at the Saos and I went, okay. I already knew by the time I was drafting Saos that this game was going to be full of hellish blood nations and national sacred summons, as well as just Recruit Anywhere Sacreds in general. So there was going to be a lot of shit coming down the pipe towards me. And my thought for Saos was, well, they berserk, so they'll hang on for a while. Their defense skill and protection and HP aren't actually bad, and if they're 2 per square, that means that they will take an extra long time to kill, because you have to keep moving between squares, and they'll filter up more slowly, and so they're actually really good Chaffee Sacreds, especially because they only cost 19 gold. On top of that, I can drop a stat bless on them, and buff like their defense or their attack, their strength, something like that, and make them do some attritional damage while they're dying like that. And they might actually serve as a decent roadblock for all these sacred summons that I expect to be coming for my ass. So that's the theory behind the Saos. The Saos is going to be, especially in the later part of the game, kind of my main front line, where these guys get hit with a Divine Blessing and then rush forward and use their stat-blessed superior stat line to cause attrition to enemy units while they're also being ground down and thus supporting, just keeping the enemy away from my communions and such in the back line. Second Recruit Anywhere Sacred, the Pegasus Rider. Pegasus Rider is very expensive in gold and recruitment points, but costs almost no resources. So I can mix them and Saos, which costs slightly more resources than anything else, very efficiently. And I took them just because they fly. Their defense skill is really, really good. Their protection is really, really bad. Their attack skill is okay, their strength is low, but they do have a lance charge, so they do pretty significant piercing damage when they charge in, and they do get 2 attacks. Unfortunately, they're size 4, so you only get 1 per square. Mainly, the reason I took Pegasus Riders is to force the opponent to guard against the possibility of them. Just creating that little bit of extra inefficiency in my opponent's battle plans. Honestly, I'm not good enough at battle scripting to take advantage of that reliably most of the time, probably. But, even so, Pegasus Riders are, I think, situationally worthwhile. The real nice thing about them is, of course, I'll be able to recruit them from any fort, so I'll be able to kind of pull them up as required, especially since I get Citadels, which have a bigger recruitment point bonus than other forts, than standard forts. So I should be able to recruit a few of these anywhere I need them, pretty much any time I need them, and use them as for that surprise flying rear attack factor. I can layer buffs on them. Mage are extremely good at layering buffs on people, and have them just hop into the back and cause what chaos they can before they die. I am going to have to treat them as mostly disposable, but if they can kill a couple of mages, I mean, if a squadron of 6 or 8 Pegasus Riders kills 2 mages or maybe 3, they've paid for themselves, and I'm okay with that trade. They also have short bows, but they'll never be using them because, like, fuck that, why would I? Now, this is a very interesting unit. This unit comes from the Gateward Valley Independent site, the Centaur Chariot. Stat-wise, it doesn't look super impressive, but there's two things that make it actually work really, really well in certain contexts. The first is, it's a fast trampler, so it has combat speed 20 and it tramples. The number of squares you can trample in any given quote-unquote round, any given period of time, is determined by your combat speed. With combat speed 20, Centaur Chariots can often trample 2 or 3 squares of enemy troops before they take any attacks back. And if you deploy them in fairly large blocks, what that means is that Centaur Chariots never actually get focused down, which is the main weakness of trampling units. Like if you look at Troglodytes or Shambler Thralls, they'll trample alone into the middle of an enemy unit, stop, and they get stabbed by 9 guys simultaneously. Centaur Chariots are a lot less prone to that because they are so fast. They also have decent defense skill and decent protection. On top of that, the second quality that makes them very useful is that when they die, they have a temporary second shape. They turn into just an enslaved Centaur Chariot. Effectively, the only actual change is that they become a slave and their base morale goes down. But they still are a size 4 fast-moving trampler. In fact, they move slightly faster because the guys in the back are dead. Now, they still die for real after the battle, but that gives them time to get another few kills. So, Centaur Chariots end up being a hugely efficient way to spend gold, especially early in the game. Centaur Chariots can expand very effectively, and they don't take a whole lot of... Well, okay, let me put it this way. Centaur Chariots either take almost no attrition, or they just lose, depending on what's in the province. They can trample heavy cavalry pretty effectively, which is hilarious to me, because they're size 4, so they can trample size 3 guys like cavalry. They can trample... I mean, anything that's size 3 or below, they can actually trample pretty efficiently. I'm not sure how they would do against, like, Colossi Light Infantry, but I want to say that for cost, they'd win. I mean, I think if you had 10 Centaur Chariots versus 22 or 24 Colossi Light Infantry, I think the Chariots might come out on top there. And, of course, once again, they take buffs pretty well. You can drop Legions of Steel on them, you could drop... you could drop Quickness on them if I had Water Mages. Could spam Quickness or Quickening. That would be actually hilarious, since it would double the speed of their trample. But in any case, very, very solid units. Easily competitive with National Chariots. Like, compare these guys to Tianqi's National Chariots, the Noble Chariots. They're very comparable gold cost. In fact, I think the same. And Tianqi's Chariots cost a lot more resources for a lot more prot, but are, I believe, slower, which means they're actually worse at trampling. Anyway, it's an interesting comparison. And then my final unit was a joke pick. Like, literally, this was a gag pick. It's the Grey Knights. So Grey Knights have a really fantastic stat line. They're also stealthy and ethereal, which are honestly quite valuable special traits to have. The problem is just that they cost 145 gold. Let me say that again. They cost 145 gold for a knight who's ethereal. I understand that ethereality is a strong quality in certain contexts. If all the enemy has is troops with mundane weapons, ethereal units are pretty much a hard counter. But at the same time, that's not actually a very common situation. And it's certainly not a situation you can plan on holding past, like, maybe turn 15 or turn 18. After that, your opponent should be pulling out battle magic in any major battle. Always. So, the fact that Grey Knights are ethereal is actually of only moderate importance by the end of year 1, and drops off rapidly in importance thereafter. That said, actually the valuable part of them, and the part why I did take them, the reason why I did take them despite them costing the fucking earth, is that they're stealthy. And so, with stealthy units like this, if you're careful, you can, pull off some nasty surprises. Because, like I said, Grey Knights are countered by battle magic. That relies on A, there being enemy mages on the field, and B, those enemy mages having the paths and or the scripts to effectively cast spells against ethereal opponents. Because if Grey Knights attack basic troops without magic backup, they will destroy them. I mean, they are high-stat knights who also ignore 3/4 of all hits. Like, yeah, they will actually trade perfectly fine against most mundane troops. It's mages and sacreds with magic weapons that they have to be wary of, and that will destroy them with contemptuous ease and great efficiency. So, I'm probably never going to recruit many Grey Knights. I may never recruit any, depending on what my financial situation ends up being like. But they're there, and they can be used if I can find a situation where they will be useful. There are some times when what you need is a super tough ethereal unit, and in those situations, the cost doesn't matter, you just buy them because that's what you need. So, if those situations arise, the Grey Knights will be there for me. Finally, my capital site, the Citizens' Assembly, allows recruitment of the Adepts of the Iron Order and the Grey Knights, gives me 1 fire, 1 air, and 2 astral pearls per turn, and has a 25% chance to blast undead units in the capital with 10 armor negating, magic resistance negates damage. That's every undead unit. Every turn has to make that roll. So if I'm ever sieged down by a million skeletons, that will actually help me a lot. There's a reason I say that. Kalkheim here is, it's Middle-Age Ulm with elves, blood, and Solarian cultists. So, yeah, they'll be churning out a lot of greatsword skeletons. But in any case, the other interesting thing about this is we were allowed to pick not only our nation and our units and all that stuff, we also chose, we didn't have to draft because repeats were allowed at this point, we also chose 4 national spells and 1 national item. For my national spells, I made some interesting decisions, and I still wonder about these decisions, kind of. I'm not 100% sold on them, but I think I can do something with them, and I think they'll be interesting, more importantly. The first thing I did was take Late Age Ulm's national spell that allows him to summon vampire counts, and of course I renamed everything and rewrote all the chaff, rewrote all the story, as usual, all the fluff. So I can summon Immortal Diabolists, which are Death 2, Blood 2. They're effectively Circle Masters, except they fly and they're immortal and they free spawn Thralls. So I can do that as soon as I get up to Blood 3, Death 3, which in my case will require hitting Construction level 4 and building a Skull Staff and then empowering somebody in Blood or forging him a Bloodthorn. So, like, probably pretty early. Between turns 12 and 20, I'll be able to start churning out vampires, and I'll be able to churn them out quite quickly. Compared to waiting until level 7 to start casting Curse of Blood, which requires Death 4, which will actually be kind of hard for me to get to, because I don't have any native Death 3. I may have to summon some kind of Death Mage in order to do that. But in any case, so that's 1 of my national spells. 2 of my national spells then were in Conjuration. They're both at Conjuration 5. I chose Heavenly Fires, which is the Early Age Tianxi national summon of the Demons of Heavenly Fires. And I chose Summon Ujigami, which is a Jomon national spell that summons an ethereal general/thug/priest chassis. And the reason I took these was, I took Ujigami primarily for the leadership and the priest levels. You can also thug with them, and I do intend to thug with them to some extent, but mainly the cool thing about Ujigami is that they are leadership 120 priests, and they're ethereal, so they're tough to kill. Plus they wear heavy armor, so they're doubly tough to kill. Having 120 leadership, of course, means you can have 4 squads, and you give a +2 morale bonus to each one of them. Actually, technically, it's the having 4 squads that gives you the +2 morale, and also default, unless that's been adjusted manually, also gives you 120 units worth of leadership. But so Ujigami can lead large armies, and they give them a morale bonus. On top of that, with my Mage, I have the paths to easily forge the Helm of Heroes, which gives +2 inspirational to a commander. I can stack up an Ujigami that gives a very, very significant morale bonus to everyone he leads, with pretty minor investment. And that, of course, will let me use Burgmeister Guard at morale like 13 or 14. Crossbowmen at morale 12 or 13, etc., etc. You see where I'm going with this. Centaur Chariots at morale 15. So all of that will really help keep my armies on the field, which I think will be very, very important. The Heavenly Fires, I mainly picked because everybody else was picking the Blood Summons, and I wanted to be different, because I just gotta be special, man. But Heavenly Fires are actually pretty cool. They only cost 2 gems now. 6 fire gems gets you 3 of them. And they're actually very similar to Storm Demons. They're a little bit less good than Storm Demons are, primarily because their missiles are armor-piercing fire damage instead of armor-negating shock damage. So they're more easily resistible, half of armor applies against them, and they don't stun people that they hit. In other ways, though, Demons of Heavenly Fires are very similar to Storm Demons. And they cost less, which is not the thing that you normally say about a gem costing summon versus a slave costing summon. But Heavenly Fires literally cost a fifth of what Storm Demons do. It's 2 gems each versus 10 Blood Slaves each. At that exchange rate, I'm comfortable with saying that Heavenly Fires are actually cheaper. On top of that, they're easier to cast, for me at least, because they don't require Blood 3, Air 1, which is kind of a weird cross path. Fire Astral is also a relatively uncommon cross path, but it does happen, and in particular, I have Mage, which are a very cheap, spammable any fort research monkey / communion slave / combat mage / summoner, my do-everything mage, basically, who can cast this spell, just at base, with no randoms or anything. So that, I think, might actually end up being very, very useful for me. The other thing about Heavenly Fires is that their ranged attack is strength-linked, so of course you can drop strength buffs on them, and they also have fire power, or heat power, which means they get +3 strength in hot terrain. So you can pretty easily push the Flaming Wheel missile attack that these guys have up to like 20 armor-piercing damage or more. It's not bad. It is not bad at all. I don't think you can get really more than 20. I think their base strength is like 12 or 13. You can get +3 from heat and then +4 from Strength of Giants, or the equivalent effect. So yeah, I think you max out at 19 or 20, but still, 20 AP ain't nothing to fuck with. Like, really. That's a lot of damage. And we talked about the Ujigami already. Beyond that, I have one more national spell, and that is Strange Fire. Once again, an Astral Fire crosspath. This requires Astral 2, which means I have to have at least 2 Magus Communion Slaves in order to cast it. More likely 4. If I have 4 Communion Slaves, then I'll be able to cast it for half fatigue. And then on top of that, I can boost the astral level of the slaves, so that they then take half fatigue from it as well. And the thing about Strange Fire is that it has range, which scales. Its area of effect is fixed, unfortunately. If its area of effect scaled, it would be amazing. As it is, it's merely very good. It does 8 +1 per level, armor-piercing, untyped, and thus unresistible magic damage that's ×3 versus undead and demons. Now, notably, the demon tag applies to every summonable blood sacred, and we have every summonable blood sacred in this game. We've got people who are taking Onekis, or at least every summonable blood sacred that's a very good spell. We have people taking Onekis, we have people taking Shedim, we have people taking... Actually, I don't know if anyone's taken Asrapas. I don't think anyone took the Lonkin summons, although I could be wrong about that. I'll double check after this. But we definitely have people taking Ozelotls, and we definitely have people taking Shedim. I'm sorry, taking, oh, I'm losing my mind. They're not Shedim. Shedim are the ones that are knockoff Storm Demons. They are taking... I've forgotten the name. Seir, that's it, Seirim. So Blood Boys is one of, I think, 2 or 3 nations that have taken the Summon Seirim spells, or Scapegoats, which is the cheaper, you get fewer Seirim version of it. So we've got lots and lots of Blood Sacreds all over the shop, and thus, I keep pressing the wrong buttons while I'm talking, hold please, and thus, having access to this spell is, in my opinion, kind of a big deal, because this spell, at base, is just straight up 24 armor-piercing damage, 2 demons in 3 squares. It's a lot of damage. And if you're casting it with 4 slaves, it's actually 27 damage, because it's 9, +1 for the extra level, ×3. And then you can do things like you can have someone cast Light of the Northern Star, which boosts your astral. You can have a Communion Master obviously cast Power of the Spheres, or be holding a Crystal Shield. Astral is pretty easy to buff. Even in combat, you can push yourself up 2 levels of Astral without any effort, really, by casting a couple of spells. So I could easily be doing 33 or possibly 36 damage each to undead and demons, armor-piercing damage, in an area of effect 3. Strange Fire spam will overwhelm any conceivable Demon Bless if you drop it into a big Blobbo demons. Blood Bond regeneration won't be able to keep up with that kind of damage output, because even though they're spreading half of it around, they're spreading around half of 3 squares worth of damage to everyone nearby. And a Magus Communion, which is, once again, a very cheap, very efficient, very powerful communion, will be able to shit this spell out endlessly. So as long as the chaff that's in front holds up, my Magi should be able to absolutely wreck hordes of blood sacred summons. Now, of course, flyers will be an issue. I'll need to have a lot of chaff, and I'll take a lot of casualties in the process. But it's doable, and Strange Fire is a big part of the reason why. On top of that, of course, if I don't want to spam Strange Fire, Magi can also spam Gifts from Heaven very easily, because they are Imperial Geomancers, just they have fire as well. And Gifts from Heaven or Earthquake are also great ways to kind of start clearing the field, as it were. Could do Falling Fires. Falling Fires is like Strange Fire, except instead of the range scaling, it's area of effect scales, which is in many ways, I would say, better. And the damage is locked at 15, so it does more damage to everything that's not a demon or undead, but it does a lot less damage to demons and undead. And those, of course, are the ones I'm worried about. Also, Strange Fire comes a level earlier, so you can go up to level 4 Evocation and then stop and go researching something more interesting, instead of going up to level 5 or level 6. Though I will want to go up to level 6 because Magma Eruption, also a really good spell. Big area of effect, big damage, not armor piercing unfortunately, but it also drops a lot of armor negating fatigue on people. Magma Eruption, another really good one that I'll probably be doing. Astral Fires, potentially. It's area of effect scales, which is what makes it kind of good. It is magic resistance negates, unfortunately. Otherwise, 10 armor negating damage would be, whoo, baby, the perfect spell. The best spell. But I will go down Evocation at some point here. In any case, that's the nation. That's everything they've got. We were allowed to choose a Pretender God chassis that was outside of the nation's choices to help us customize a little bit. I elected not to, because personally, I think for Late Age Marion, their Pretender selection is actually already really good, and I didn't want to give away exactly what I was choosing. I'm also not going to give away exactly what I'm choosing in this video, because, of course, this video is going up just as the game is starting, and I will have to wait until we're turned 12 or 15 before I actually post videos of the game. But I'm excited about it. I think it's going to be hilarious good fun. And I just wanted to kind of let y'all know that this will be coming up. So watch this space. The revolution will be televised on YouTube, and we will see you soon. I hope you'll tune in to watch me overthrow the imperialist oppressors and establish freedom, justice, liberty, peace, mom, and apple pie for the independence of Dominions and all related planes. Thank you very much. See you next time.